our spokes, which are our areas of interest, and then the outside is the community. Our idea being that you have to identify the spokes, you have to support all of the spokes to keep the wheel healthy, to keep the hub healthy, to keep the community healthy. So, and for the audience, that's kind of my very simple, simplistic model that I go by. So in our strategic plan, you chose economic sustainability. The idea being that after I arrived in 16, of course, with state funding cuts and the lack of federal funding in some certain areas, namely timber receipts, we ended up cutting about $1.5 million out of our budget. Just, you know, in 4 or 5 weeks without much thought except getting to the bottom line. So we chose economic sustainability because what I portrayed was that we're trying to develop a model that allows us to operate effectively and efficiently under the absolute worst of circumstances. And that would be a complete loss of federal and state funding. Allows us to operate on what we can produce locally. That number's a lot smaller than we're used to. So we developed ideas that we had to do a financial plan, an economic development plan, build partnerships, work on our infrastructure, and then have some good internal services. Of course, our infrastructure is primarily driven by our 5 enterprise funds. Well, exclude ODAC, our other 4 enterprise funds. Harbor, sewer, water, refuse. Then we did a 17 work plan and an 18 work plan. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. Yes, sir?
You mentioned there were 3 elements of a healthy economy, or healthy city.
Diverse revenue streams, healthy reserves, and low debt puts you in a position of power. A wise old mayor said to me one time, or actually wrote it in a white paper, I think.
It wasn't me.
And I think that, you know, that's a good place to be, because you want to make decisions in a position of strength. You know, in your own life, you know, in your own finances and so forth, when you're short on money, sometimes you make decisions that get you through the short term, but they don't get you, you know, they're not very productive for the long term. So we're always trying to deal with that from the opposite direction. And I think those 3 elements together put you in that position of strength. So we talked about the financial part of it. We want to be self-sustaining with less federal dollars, less state dollars, and our local revenues, as I said. Another thing that we talked about was reviewing all of our taxes, our 29 exemptions and exceptions, review all of those and implement changes as we thought appropriate. In that respect, whether it's eventually judged appropriate by the voters or not, we did 2 taxes. Motor vehicle fuel tax at 4% and raising the cap from $3,000 to $7,500, raising about $330,000, $300,000 in revenue necessary to fill the final gap in our budget and give us a balanced budget. As you know, we've gone through a couple iterations of that, and now we'll be going to a vote. Our other goal was full funding for the school district. At this juncture, we have asked them to consider a 3-year, $1.5 million appropriation instead of their request annually, which has been in about the 1.19 million for 3 years prior to that. So we've asked them to cut. Our desire was to get CCMC, the hospital, on a sustainable financial model, because we couldn't run $1 million and $1.2 million deficits and fund that out of the city every year. The idea being to reduce our support dollars from sort of an ongoing appropriation request to an annual appropriation. Last year it was $566,000. This year we did $625,000, But with the purchase of the pharmacy, that goes back to 575, even though 625 is still the number in the budget. We did rate analyses for all of the enterprise funds, working on grants. We have a few straggler grants. I wouldn't call them stragglers, but we have small grants. The biggest one available to us right now is the Adams Street project. Is that a grant or a loan? Grant. 400 and some thousand, and we have a match. We've already paid that. That project's going to go forward. And then produce a sustainable economic model. How do we survive forever on this? So we kind of have three options that we need to reconsider. Our current level, which is this year's budget. I think pretty easily we could sustain that number. Higher level, we've talked about this before, we have no facilities, very little facilities money, very little capital money, things like that. So we're not making progress in any of those areas. If that model held true in this building in particular, you could imagine that year after year after year, the moss just grows on it because we don't have any money to, we're not appropriating money to fix or don't have additional monies. What can we do at a lower level? Let's say we operated on 9 million instead of 10.5. What would that look like? So those are the things we have to consider going forward. Then we talked about an economic development plan. Our initial thought was, my initial thought with your support was to promote tourism and events. That's really where we had some area of growth because it's sales tax. It's people who come in, they leave. There's no extra strain on the infrastructure. But we really don't have, I guess, the convenience of that tourism thing. I mean, we're not on a main route by Anchorage with a highway going by, so we're going to have to make an effort. We're forming a committee. We still haven't kicked that off. Kathy is still putting that together, so we're gearing that up. We've been talking to the chamber about that. We talked about promoting current events. We're still doing that. We're still funding the chamber. I think the chamber is doing a good job of kind of gearing those things up, providing more information, redoing their website, making contacts. Improve our marketing. That's a combination of the city and the chamber. We've had Kathy putting together a lot of public information for consumption about the Cordova Center in the city of Cordova. We talked about fisheries improvements, harbor improvements, growth, put together the fisheries committee again. We've talked about land disposal, land development, all of that is in the strategic plan. And if I could just go back for a second. I field a lot of questions from you, and I'm happy to answer those questions. A lot of that information is contained in the budget. Might need some clarification, but a lot of that is contained in the budget. So if you can't find it there, then I'll be happy to answer it. We talked about putting together additional partners. We're pretty localized in that, but we're working on additional partners and increasing the Cordova Center use, which I think we've done. And we continue to do. You know, our goal is to have the concert tonight in the middle of the week. We're trying to get as many events as we can put together. But you know, a lot of what's happening here, like the concert today, is put together by the arts pageant, and they are volunteers. And they don't get any funding from us necessarily other than the facility. So that's the thought. And we talked about partnerships and the chamber move. Still something to discuss on that, whether or not there's space here for the chamber and what that would look like in the facility. Crater Lake. So far, we've just been providing staff support. When we get requests from Cordova Electric about Crater Lake, we do it the best we can in reviewing documents and providing documents, but at this point, we're not supplying any funding for that project, which is an infrastructure project that we've talked about. You know, this spring, the geotechnical testing is going to take place. We have to give right-of-way permits. There's some some cell towers up there and things are going to be that we're participating in. So I think we need to deal with that. Forest Service special use permits, that's a Forest Service thing, but we've talked to them about that. We talked about the fast response cutter, which is unlikely with the Coast Guard, but we still continue to develop that partnership. We're putting in credit card machine and 24-hour access to Bedarkie, primarily because of the Coast Guard. So we're working on those things. We talked about the Prince William Sound Science Center move. That's in progress. You'll vote on the second reading of that tonight. So that's on track. The White Shed sidewalk project with NVE is still on track. We took over the antifreeze from NVE. They had started that project, but funding sort of dried up on the operations side, so we're doing that. So we work on those partnerships.
I guess just so on your list, you had the Science Center move, White Shed sidewalk. What about the placement of that stretch of road from the ferry down to where the Science Center is going to be? You know, that's the state, but I just was wondering if we have anything to do with that. Or
That's a 2020 project.
Bumped it up 2 years.
They're going to repave that. But one of the things we might consider in all of this is, you know, the sewer and water line out there. So we're working with the watershed project on recycling. They're working on some Rasmussen Foundation grants in other places. And, you know, right or wrong, I indicated to them that we'd be happy to be partners in that. We're still recycling. We just got our conveyor, our ruined no good conveyor belt out of the refuse building. And so we're going to fill that pit in, not with anything that's permanent, but temporarily, so that we can use a loader to make bales of aluminum and other recyclable materials, so we use the baler. So we continue to work on those. On infrastructure, we talked about sidewalks, Adams Street and White Shed, water capacity at Crater Lake, 2nd Street Improvements Phase 2, or Street Improvements Phase 2, which we don't really have any money for. Partnerships, Prince William Sound, the Copper River Watershed Project, NVE. We're working with CCMC right now. We share 2 employees with them. Kodiak, we talked about developing new RV spaces. We have a 5-mile RFP out. We're going to review Kodiak, the current site. Oil reuse. Of course, you know, we hit a huge financial problem there. $320,000. Lowest bid came in at $900, $800. So we have a problem there. We're working with NVE right now to see if we can come up with any other models that work for us. Probably the thing where we're lacking is the comp plan. We talked about chapters 4, 16, 17, and 18. Some of this we can do in-house, but initially I said, you know, we could probably do a lot of this in-house. I don't think the comp plan is something that we can really tackle. I think we need some professional help on that. And then we also talked about infrastructure in terms of developing land and making land available. And this is an ongoing conversation for us. In terms of internal services, staffing to the 2020 plan, which is ongoing and I think on schedule. We've gone from a top of 66 staff just a couple years ago down to 58 and a half. So we're doing pretty good on that. If you look at our budget, our personnel costs are decreasing every year. It's gone from $7.4 million a few years ago down to $5.8 million. Still getting everything done. We're on a hiring freeze, except for those that are budgeted, so we're not doing anything new. Working on a reorganization. We're sharing 2 positions with CCMC. That's ongoing. We're talking about sharing another position here coming up pretty quick. It's functions that we can you know, we all do that we don't need to have specialized people for, because we're not big enough, and it cuts their costs in half and ours in half. Reductions in all the federal taxes and all those things, and you know, PERS benefits, all of those things help us. I think an average position at halftime saves us about $74,000 or $37,000 per hourly position, and it saves us about $47,000 per exempt position to share at halftime. Code rewrites, again, we talked 14, 16, 17, and 18. We did some workflow analysis on what we're doing and how we're doing it. Process improvements in the way we do things. We work on that every day. Staff development and training, that's ongoing, but that's one of the places where we cut the budget to the bone. Nobody goes anywhere except for the police department, really. And the only reason they go is because there's certifications and training that's required of them, and so they do that. And then budget review. I'd just like to point out some pages for you. Page 11 is the strategic plan. Page 19 is the facilities needs. Page 21 is the debt service. And page 25 is our staffing plan, along with the 4 appendices, which are the rate analysis for all of the enterprise funds. So that's where we are. We have basically, if you look at the 2017 work plan, whoops, on page 15 in your budget, if you look at the 17 action items, we have pretty much completed everything on that work plan. The waste oil project, or the used oil project, I need to change that word, is still hanging out there because we ran into problems. And the CIP cross-reference. I have all the department heads right now working on capital lists so that you'll know in any given year. We have a list of assets in the budget, but you'll know by department what needs to be replaced and what it's going to cost in a more defined way for each individual department. The 2018 work plan, which is just below that, is what we're kind of working on this year. And you can see that all of those are, as much as we can, are still about to unfold or already are unfolding. You know, the project development for the RV park, everything is sort of else is unfolding. So with that, I'll entertain whatever you want to talk about it. I think at this point, there's a few things that need to be done. I think the comp plan going forward this year is really important. In the comp plan, and we've talked about a waterfront, it's not necessarily a waterfront. It's a shipyard, waterfront, Southfield, Northfield master plan. We agonize over individual lot sales because we have different ideas about what do we do with that, what's most productive for us and those things. I think we can answer all of that for years to come if we have a plan. And as I've said, it doesn't matter if it has a building on it right now. You can still develop it by use for what you want to see. And I would suggest that all of those uses should be intended to maximize our revenues as a city so that we can operate at this higher level. And the other thing is those things are they're just gonna take some money. If I were gonna give you a priority for this year, I would say, let's figure out $250,000 so that we can finish the comp plan and this master plan, because we probably wouldn't finish those until next year anyway. Get it geared up what we want to do, because the community process alone for the comp plan is going to take months. Going to be a lot of public meetings, all of those things. And I think that'll be money well spent for you. I know nobody likes to spend money on that sort of stuff, but I think it'll be well spent at the end of the day. Try not to spend all of that, but you want to have it, you don't want to skimp on the process. If you're going to do it, you might as well do it well. We've had some bids in the past on the comp plan. We have some bids on the, get some bids on the whole planning of this area. Perhaps we can do it in conjunction with the comp plan so that you don't have to double up mobilization costs. And then I think the other thing that we need to do is we need to have in the infrastructure plan that I sent you, or the latest federal budget, they approved the timber receipts. I'll go back to what we talked about in the very beginning of the budget, that we should not rely on those federal and certain state funds as an annual funding mechanism, because they're uncertain. They can go away in any year they're not appropriated, and we should operate on a level of self-sustainability and then use those funds to either replenish the permanent fund or to do projects the following year to get things done that we want to do. So what I would like to do also with some money is, the other thing that was funded, the Tiger grants. I would like to have a professionally prepared Tiger grant. Those run about 15 grand.
What is a Tiger Grant?
I forget what it stands for exactly.
Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery.
There you go. And you can go online for Tiger grants and you can look at the state of Alaska. A multimodal trail was funded in the 17 cycle for, I don't know, $8 or $10 million. In a little place in Alaska. So you just never know. They're very, very competitive. And in the Tiger grant cycle, last cycle, they gave out $39.6 million or something. It was 500 total for the year. But in this cycle, it'll be due in October.
Okay, and these are funded at the federal level.
Yes.
Okay.
They just tripled the funding in this cycle of Tiger grants.
Yeah.
So what kind of grant would you be looking for?
Harbour.
Would you want to do an expansion or just a direct replacement?
Well, I think that's to be determined. That's not for me to determine. That's for Tony and the Harbour Commission and the council to determine what you want to do. But we'll put a number on it. And then I think at some level we'd have to be prepared to put in some money of our own for that. You know, the more you put in, the better your chances are. Our chances of getting one, if we do it in-house, are nil. It's just a time and professionalism. But if we hire someone that has done these before, for example, and I'm not advocating, our engineering company, P&D, that did our previous harbor write-up, they've done 4 or 5 of those. I didn't ask about success, but their preparation of one of those runs somewhere between 10 and 15,000. And I think, you know, that just should be a given in our budget every single year to pursue a Tiger grant till we get one, or never get one, as the case may be.
So if we go ahead and expend the $10,000 to $15,000 to prepare it, is that something we have to do every year, or can we just get it prepared once and then just like slap some new dates on it and send it in?
Well, we've had them prepared before here, but I don't think it's a slap new dates on it
Type of thing.
thing. It's a professionally prepared with new data, with new input on an annual basis. I think if you go through and the people who are evaluating Tiger grants see the same old one from Cordova every year, that the chances are pretty nil. You know, there's people that professionally engage in this, engineering firms that do it all the time. I've worked with some in other states, and yet to be determined who at the end of the day I think would be great. I've contacted several people today to find out what their costs would be. I got P&Ds back because they're close, so.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's something that we should be doing. We should have already been doing it, so.
Yeah, and as we move forward, remember, our strategic plan is 3 years. We're going to the 2020 plan. When we prepare the 2020 budget, we're going to be on a new cycle of our entire strategic planning. What we're trying to do here is update again and set priorities. I think our priorities, as I'm hearing, is, you know, we talk about a lot about land availability. We have the 13 stuff, and we have an RFP on, you know, the Northville out there, whatever it was called, to make improvements there. So I think the first thing you have to do is figure out, is this still on track with where you think we should be going? I would offer that we can continue to operate where we are, but that's not going to work out for you very well at the end. What we're doing on our side, we're trying to cut costs. And I believe our personnel costs will continue to go down. You know, I think 2 years from now, we're going to have several retirements. And at some point this spring or early summer, I would like to spend some time talking about a reorganization with you that I think will save us some money as well. Don't really want to get into the particulars of that right now. But so.
I want to just interject for a minute. Winetta Ayers is here, and she's the director of the Prince William Sound Economic Development District, and they were here for the transportation meeting this morning on the ferry, and so they wanted to come to this discussion on strategic planning. But could I just ask you, Winetta, to introduce yourself and your colleagues there?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Mayor Copeland. As you said, my name is Winetta Ayers. I'm the executive director for the Prince William Sound Economic Development District. So we're a federally recognized economic development district by the Economic Development Administration. And we publish a regional strategic plan. One of the benefits of that is we go to the communities and ask what your priorities are, put your investment priorities into that plan. And that qualifies those projects for lower federal match in a number of different pots, but it's specifically with the EDA, usually USDA Rural Development, and some others too as well. I have with me Carrie Kissel, who is a rural transportation planner with the National Association of Development Organizations. So their members are organizations like Prince William Sound EPD all around the country, again, rurally focused, and we've been visiting with folks in the community about the ferry and about how it works and what are the priorities. And as I said earlier today, I learned through that process how Carrie's brain works, and she knows where all the money is buried in Washington, D.C. and transportation pots of money. And so that's been helpful in terms of hearing people's issues and trying to match them and align them with maybe a potential pot of money that might help us. And then also, I'm not a coach. Yes, she is. Annie Reeves is the acting city manager for the city of Whittier, and she's been a part of the meeting this morning on the ferry as well. And of course, Cordova Whittier as a city pair is certainly in Prince William Sound is the highest traffic route, but you know, it's also one of the top 5 in the system, I believe. So, so we have a critical piece. I think we learned that today that 19% of the revenue in the system comes from Prince William Sound routes. So everything that you're doing here, all of the thinking that you're putting towards what community assets you have and how those align with economic sustainability, I think, you know, I'm sitting here applauding what you're doing, the thinking behind this. And we also have some priorities beyond the ferry, which are specifically in the maritime sector and in tourism. And we have some small projects that we hope will go towards helping sustain some businesses in those areas. The tourism area is one where I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth, not only at the local level within the 5 communities, or those that want to participate in tourism. We have some that are a little on the fence about tourism, but also how the 5 communities can work together, and also look at other assets that are underutilized in the Sound, particularly the marine parks are an asset that I believe are underutilized and pose an economic opportunity for the Prince William Sound. So we'll be talking more about that as we go along, but I think, you know, of course, everything that you're doing, I think is focusing on your assets and how to best utilize those. That's the best approach.
If, would council mind if I just did a quick, like 5 or 10 minute rundown again to kind of, some of you have been fishing or busy and stuff, and I just kind of like to reiterate the DC trip kind of and the waterfront development and whatnot.
That would help.
I think somebody might be on the line now. I heard it beep anyway.
Yeah, is that you, Councilman Burton, on the line?
Yep, sure is.
Okay, great, thanks. We heard you join in, so.
Yeah.
Okay, and we sent you a picture of the drawing on the board here, in case you have a chance to act. Okay, great. So, basically, you know, it's really, I've been learning a lot. Last year, we kind of, right at the beginning of the year, we kind of put a panic request for federal funding in for waterfront development. I mean, we all know that there's been a lot of pressure. Businesses, multi-million-dollar enterprises have been asking to locate on the couple of remaining lots. Is the North Fill area, that would actually have to be filled and developed, and we're getting proposals on undeveloped land. And then as soon as we did the breakwater fill there for protection from the north wind, we've had several proposals on that. So we know there's interest there. There's everything from processors to retail to commercial scale businesses. And I might need a little help on the history, but essentially most of our waterfront was developed after the '64 earthquake, when the uplift made all of this shallow approach to the heart city. So where boats used to be able to approach right up to docks and along the shoreline here where the hill breaks over, that uplift. So the Army Corps came in and dredged this polygon that's our harbor now. They did the north fill right then, and then the south fill I'm a fuzzy on. Did they fill that at the same time?
That was in the 70s.
Okay.
They expanded the harbor.
Okay, so they expanded the harbor in the 70s then, and that's it. We've had a net loss of waterfront assets through fires and decrepitness. Councilman Jones sent some pictures, kind of historical, but New England Fish, all of that dock space is gone. From Cannery Road this way, all of that's gone. The state built a little bit of marine highway dock space, and then the Coast Guard. We built one small dock just for the Coast Guard. At one time we had a floating fuel dock, that's gone now. So we've had a net loss of space. We house the largest commercial fishing fleet in the state of Alaska. The last 10-year average, Cordova has ranked on average the 13th largest seafood delivery port in the United States on value. And we just don't have any, the tenders that come to town can't even come and tie up to shore. We don't even have dock space for them. So they come here and deliver their fish and go out and anchor up, and they can't even come into town. So we have very little to offer in the way of services. We have nothing to offer in the way of uplands for development. And we have boats bunking, small boats bunking between each other where there's space because they're on a waiting list, and large boats don't even have room in the harbor. So we have this pressure, and when you add up all of our city, energy, communications, private sector processor and fishing fleet infrastructure, we have $1 billion sitting here. And it essentially fishes for 3 to 4 months a year. So, you know, there are a lot of boats fishing from north to south that would like a protected harbor like this to, yeah, Jamie?
No, I'm just.
Okay, to hang out. So we've had the pressure for years, and we just haven't had an organized approach to developing it. It's, as Manager Lanning said, it's going to take staff and money to grow, and some risk taking to avail ourselves of those opportunities. Just a quick recap from a trip to DC a couple weeks ago. Basically, the 3 delegations said the same thing. There's a lot of support for Cordova, and for the reasons we mentioned. Oh, okay. So the other thing is, we're a working fishing port. The U.S. is now the 2nd largest consumer of seafood in the world, and over 90% of the seafood is imported into the U.S. So, especially with this administration, from a trade balance perspective and international commerce, this is a huge port. And it's we can help tip that. And as we work with our Fisheries Development Committee, we had our first little success with this Tanner crab opener for the first time in 34 years. But we all know that we have almost 30, added up almost 30 fisheries that we've had over the last 30 years. And we're now down in some leadership positions like razor clams. And now we're down to pretty much a one-trick pony with the salmon. And then the groundfish, our groundfish piece is fairly big. It's 1.5% of $1 billion fishery. So actually at almost $15 million, it's fairly significant. And that quietly happens here in February, March, and April. And we get killed by the poor ferry service. It cost our fleet $1 million once to have the Aurora out of service for 3 weeks during our groundfish fishery, because they had to freeze the fish and sell them that way. And that just came right out of the fisherman's pocket. So we have a lot of opportunity, a lot of underutilized infrastructure, and our big bottleneck is really our waterfront infrastructure that hasn't been improved for almost 50 years now. So that's kind of the backstory, and it's compelling with our delegation and with the state of Alaska, who is our partner in the raw fish tax revenue growth. We made some energy and big water system improvements that gave us the capacity to bring all those fish on shore. And we averaged, again, for the first 10 years when we were 26th largest port, we averaged $500,000 a year in raw fish tax revenues. Since our investments in infrastructure that allowed us to do that onshore processing, the processors invested about $30 million by my count over the last 20 years. And we're now generating on average about $1.1 million in raw fish tax revenues. So that's an important story of the state, because they've already recouped their investments in those increased revenues. So, you know, we can build on those successes. Basically what the delegations said is we have 3 opportunities that are all right in front of us. The WARDA bill, we missed the last WARDA bill. They specifically named Alaska and Harbour Development in that last bill. We need to work to make sure that happens in the next one. The last bill actually specifically named some community projects. I think Valdez was one. I forget, there were a couple others that were named. But that's an even better step if we can get there. They also mentioned the Tiger Grant and also the infrastructure package, which is starting to move. And most recently, they've said they're going to probably move that in pieces. Energy, transportation, so forth. That means it has a better chance of some of those pieces moving forward through Congress. But again, it's going to take some resources and investments, and if that's our strategic goal, then we'll have to position ourselves to do that. I'm going back to DC at the end of the month. I'm really not going to have anything really detailed to carry, but again, it'd be good to at least know what council wants to move forward with, and we can carry that message. We're fortunate as part of this transportation meeting this morning, Robert Venables came, and I had a chance to meet with him last night for a couple hours, and he's been on the Marine Transportation Advisory Board since its inception, so 3 governors, and then the legislature has had him on that board. He was also a city and borough manager at Haines, and he's a Southeast Conference. His day job is his Southeast Conference Energy Chair, but he's also chairing the transportation, AMHS transportation study where they're looking at renovating that, and also the Marine Transportation Advisory Board chair. But he said there is one consulting firm in particular that has lobbied for just about every successful waterfront improvement project in Southeast. And I mentioned before when I was at PN&D and got together with Sean Shosted, he's a senior design engineer now, he was just showing me all the real flexible and useful infrastructure that a lot of the ports have installed in Southeast, in Sitka, Petersburg, other communities. But what I was noticing is he's giving me all these brochures of things that PN&D designed and built is all the communities. You know, Sitka, Petersburg, Wrangell, Craig. I mean, you just keep going down the list of all the Southeast communities that have done waterfront infrastructure upgrades, mostly in the last 10 to 15 years. And I think we're losing opportunities. We're losing competitiveness at a time we should be growing those capabilities. But so I got the contact information for that group. They are interested in working for Cordova. I told them I'd mention that in the meeting tonight to council, and I forwarded that information to Alan as well. They are in DC, so we'd have an opportunity to meet with them there at the end of the month. So the other big piece that's important, and I'm kind of going through part of this for Winetta's benefit as well, Uncruise, and I'll get to this in the agenda, but Uncruise hit a barrier. They purchased a cruise ship that was built in the United States, has been used overseas. They brought it back to Seattle for renovation, and the Jones Act is being interpreted as saying, well, that's a foreign registry vessel, so you can't put it back into service under the Jones Act, even though it was built and even though it's going to be renovated in the U.S. So they are, I just happened to meet with Caleb Freilich in DC. Rachel Calander hooked me up with them, and we were talking about a lot of things. But when he mentioned that, I said, well, Uncruise is looking at coming to Cordova. He said, yeah, that's your boat. I said, well, okay, well, we need to be getting a letter of support going. So I drafted a letter with Caleb, and I actually, in fact, if we get a little break, I can run over and grab and get a copy to you. But I would like, if council doesn't have any objections to pre-approving that. It basically just says the community of Cordova supports this because it's going to help our economy, and we encourage a waiver for that vessel. And that could get it here as early as 2020 with the waiver, and maybe 21 or later without it. So
would that be a new ferry?
But that would be a new cruise ship that would serve Cordova. And we had Cruise West here before. Dan Blanchard, the principal of Uncruise, he was a captain. He started his own cruise lines. I think it's Costa Rica to Hawaii, and he's getting back in the Alaska market. So he's working out of Juneau now. And the other thing with our harbor renovation is Shoreside Petroleum has said one of their primary goal is to have a fuel dock in the harbor. They said that's a $4 to $4.5 million investment. So that there's a lot of private investment waiting on the sidelines that we can package with a city bond, a state match to the federal government, and I think we can put together a good package. But so that's it.
I think in terms of our strategic planning, that as the mayor talked about, our two-pronged approach initially was increased tourism and events, and the Uncruise. The other one you mentioned, Stan Stevens Tours, those kinds of things. You know, they come here on their own, 40 passengers, size boats. They come into the harbor, kind of a hard thing for them, but they get in there anyway. I don't know how they necessarily get around town or what their ability is, but part of what we're going to try to develop with this group is to attract those people, have an established menu for them of places they can go and things that they can do in the short time they're here, obviously to encourage them to spend money. So that really fits well with our strategic plan. The other thing we talked about is developing a signature event that puts Cordova on the map. Risky? Yes. Cost? Yes. But is it worth the effort? I think so. One of the people, as I've said before, I'm corresponding with is a gentleman out of Australia for extreme adventure racing. And we have the perfect environment for it, whether it's kayaking, fat tire biking because of our ski hill and different things, road racing, whatever it might be. But you know, those people are 350 miles in teams of 4 over a course, in whatever days it takes till they finish. And, you know, various disciplines. So could we get one of those going? Well, it's the same idea. Without some investment and some risk, you can be pretty certain that it's not going to fall in your lap. The other thing is, I had a great email from Councilman Jones about the harbor and land investment. And part of my response back to him was the way I think about us going forward is, if we wanted to invest $30 million of our own money in the harbor, we could do that right now. How would we do that? We would cut our budget to $6.5 million and then invest $5 million of our own. But $4.5 million of that $6 million, $6.5 million, goes to supporting other entities and debt service. So that leaves us $2 million. What would this city look like if we only had $2 million in operating funds? It'd be devastating. We'd be off the map. We couldn't operate. You get police and fire for that amount of money, and that's it. Nothing else would go. Or on the top end, which is the upper level here, you could add $5 million in revenue to the city and take our budget to $16.5 million or $15.5 million. Then put that $5 million toward infrastructure improvements, which would be a bond, or however we funded those improvements. That too, because you'd have to raise. You'd have to raise either property tax or sales tax, both double. You'd have to raise other taxes or some combination. That too would be devastating to our community. So we can't do this one. Well, we shouldn't do this one, and we shouldn't do that one. So I think this is an exercise of where we fit in the spectrum and what that's going to look like and how we're going to pay for the priorities we want. I just thought that was a good way to say it, because if you think about that, that's really hard to do.
Just a couple little anecdotes. Harbor Art said that when Cruise West was running, they were averaging $80,000 a summer in art sales out of the Harbor Art. And since Cruise West left, they've been averaging $10,000 a summer. So that's just the impact on one business. And that foot traffic from the harbor, you've heard us talk about the sidewalk over here. That's the reason for that other sidewalk, to go on down so that you have harbor access right from the harbor up to Main Street. And because fortunately we're a decent walking town.
What would the capacity of the uncruise boat be?
That one is, I can get that from them. I had the sense that it was 100 plus passengers. I think their fleet ranges up to 137, either 137 rooms or 137 passengers. There's a great tourism plan that I think City Chamber Copper River Watershed Project in the late 90s.
Yeah,
and that's, I know the Chamber kind of tries to live by that, but that kind of identified what we wanted the tourism in Cordova to look like. And basically it said, we're a fishing town. We don't want to make a whole bunch of tourism related infrastructure investments, but we value a tourism industry, but we want it to be a scale that can fit our infrastructure, not build the infrastructure to try to have an industrial scale tourism. So,
I think about, if you look at people who do provide services, I always use KOA as my favorite example, because I actually went to KOA University in Billings, Montana, and spent a week there learning about KOA, because as a town we were thinking about building such a facility for our community to on a national scenic byway, and cameras running down Main Street all the time, and how do you stop them and get their money? You know, and in those days, the average camping family looked like X, but they spent $56 net a day in the local economy, wherever they were. And I'm certain there's a, you know, I don't know if anybody has that kind of statistic, but there's a profile for the cruise ships. And let's say it's, I read something in the state of Alaska, it was about $175 a day, something like that. So just think if we could put 1,000 more people on Main Street at $175 a day. And then the sales tax. And I think that's the tourism part of that we're trying to do. But if we could also add $20 million in infrastructure, property tax capacity, that too would be a great thing. One more quick note. The city alone, if you look on page 18 in the budget, we have $75 million in assets. Hard on the ground assets. That doesn't count the hospital, and that doesn't count the school district, and we own all of those facilities. You know, NVE was looking at the Indian Health Service for the construction of an additional hospital or a new hospital facility, and they're seeking $40 million. So let's say our hospital's worth $30 million. You know, we're at 100+ million. I don't know what our school buildings are valued at, but you know, we're $120 million infrastructure just for the city, our ownership, and we have about I don't know, $15 million, approaching $20 million. 15 million is probably better. 18 million in personnel costs. So then you're taking us up to the $140 million operation that we're trying to run. So that's the magnitude of what we're trying to support and run on an annual basis. I've said over and over, I don't know what the number is, but I think when we get there and we understand it, we'll all feel better about it.
So, council, is this helpful? Kind of getting a refresher on the strategic plan. The council put a tremendous amount of work into this, and I really want to applaud. We had 6 meetings, and there was 6 or 8 meetings, and there was 6 or 7 councilmen at every one. A lot of effort went into this, and there was a lot of community support. It was encouraged, and you know, Cordova sometimes I've heard the statement Cordova fights about everything, which first of all I don't think it's true, but Cordova does debate things. And if you look in the rearview mirror at the decisions that Cordova's made over the years, they've been really successful. I mean, that tourism plan, you look at what we didn't have any control over Cruise West going out of business, but that was exactly the kind of business we were targeting. But Points North, it's their 20th anniversary, and you look at the clientele and the business and exposure and marketing they bring to Cordova, it's literally world class. And a lot of our infrastructure is world class, and kind of until you get down to the harbor, but our processing plants are fairly modern and a lot of investment. So, you know, the Economic Development District helped with they hosted a funding summit in 2000, I think. And the 3 big goals were this Cordova Center, a shipyard haul out facility, and I think maybe the elementary renovation. And that was on the heels of a community-wide town hall meeting. And we must have had 400 or 500 people in the gym, and had Bill Woods facilitated that with council. And you know, we got funding, an Economic Development Association grant for a big chunk of the boat haul out, and that thing has run at, I don't know, 5 or 6 times the estimated capacity. In fact, it filled up so quick, we've been talking about expansion within 5 years of building it. And you know, so I know sometimes it's frightening to take risks and make decisions, but this process is the right way to do it, and Cordova's done pretty darn well for itself. When you look at how little this community's had to work with and the lack of legislative, strength out of this district and out of our community, kind of in the middle zone here. Cordova's done pretty well for itself.
And again, I'll say it again, one of the keys for us is to not be afraid of failure and to admit that what we did wasn't right. It's not working, and make an adjustment. That's why we're going to do this every year. That's why we're going to have such an extensive budget process every year, so that we can make those adjustments, so that we don't get bogged down in this long-term, just got to keep plugging away at this. There's a certain time frame that you have to engage in it, but if it's not working, you have to have the courage to abandon it and change direction quickly. I am happy and sort of impressed with the chamber in their direction. They're working really hard to make improvements, and I attend all of the Economic Development District meetings. I've missed the last couple by phone, but with Juanetta coming on board, I think there's really an impetus to make improvements there, and that's a district-wide, regional-wide thing for us, where we could expand our partnerships and make those things that we engage in work better.
The only other comment I'll add, I mean, we should get some council feedback, but I think council, Manager Lanning, myself, everybody agreed that we would rather grow our economic base than raise taxes. So I just want to remind the public and ourselves that, and another part of the strategic planning process and budgeting is evaluating, decisions we made and seeing if there are opportunities or the will to restructure, make those tweaks. And this is a good time to think about that and have those discussions and stuff. So.
I think this has been really good and really useful, good context and background information about the process. So like moving forward, so this has been a good discussion, and like what are the concrete steps that we need to do in order to like complete or update? Do we go like each like A, B, C? Is that each one of those a meeting where we talk about like if these are still our priorities and what are our priorities, or I don't know, how does it work?
Well, we can go through each one of these individually and say, if you look in the packet on the strategic plan, you can say, do we need any additions to this? Do we need to check this one and say, stop here, like the used oil thing? At 800,000, it doesn't really make economic sense for us in the short term. But if you have a longer term view, then you could say that might be a decent investment, but then comes the commitment to work on making the pool able to use it, all of our facilities, school, hospital if possible, whatever you can do to use up that 23,000 gallons of used oil. But then that's a whole nother commitment financially.
So I guess while we're on the subject of the waste oil building, I have given it some thought. I know that when we were in that whole discussion phase on, do we want a warehouse behind the harbor master? Can we use the current EVOS building out of the baler? There's different pros and cons. We made like 3 different options, and we decided that we should move ahead with trying to get the warehouse behind the harbor master building. But now that we've seen that it's a little out of our reach, maybe it might be time to bring some of those other options back to the table. I'm not sure. The other thing that it brought to mind is, there is that tier 2, not the tier 1 grant with the state. Would it qualify? I don't know, but it might be worth some staff time to find out. We have 320 set aside. The total cost is 900. If we reduce scope, got rid of the mezzanine, took a couple of the windows out, didn't have the cement pad all the way around the front that's heated and thaws the snow. There's things that was put into that RFP that we could do without. Maybe plumb it to where we can add that cement pad apron. later. You know, with the mezzanine, it had to be built out of steel. It can't be wood because it's the type of building it is. And it just, that's what drove some of those things are what drove the cost up. I think there was ways that we could adjust that to reduce scope. You know, maybe we get it down to the 600,000 range or the 700, and then we go and do a 50-50 match with that tier 2, use our 320 and get 320 from the state, and then it's feasible. That was one of my ideas I had to try to make it so it could still happen, but obviously I'm not an expert on the state grants. But
that's exactly the kind of thing that I need to hear from you as a group, if that's the priority, because then I'm going to spend a lot of my time trying to develop something for you, or Leif's time and Sam's time developing something for you that you can reconsider as a proposal to make that work. And then in following years, we're going to work on the individual. We would work on the individual buildings to make those more, you know, you make that project more useful to those buildings and to ourselves. For example, the cost of fuel for the pool is $90,000 a year. If we could support that $90,000 just from used oil with an investment, it wouldn't take us very long to recoup. I think the original study for that was you know, based upon the $300,000 or $200,000 building, the return on investment for that was about 3.1 years. So it was relatively short. At the same sort of investment now, with the increased price, that investment runs out to 10 or 12 years. So that's what you have to be prepared. But those are the kind of things that I like to hear. You know, if you look at the priorities, I'd sure like to hear some input on the comp plan, the whole waterfront plan, and the Tiger Grant preparation, because those are financial decisions. And if you want to go forward with those, we're going to have to figure out how to pay for those, because it either comes out of the permanent fund, but also given the fact that, you know, we budgeted $400,000 in fish tax and got 1.16 million, it certainly helps just from a cash flow perspective that we could reappropriate money out of or appropriate money out of the cash flow to pay for those kinds of things. Exactly what we talked about. We don't have to go into debt to do something for us. Now, in the coming years, we're going to have the same sort of ability with the timber receipts. So those are the kind of things that I like to hear from you, because that helps me set my priorities. And mine are in the 2008 work plan. So if there's anything different you want me to work on, then let me know, because that's what we need to change.
Another little piece, I think, kind of a decision point is if the harbor is the priority, there's kind of two paths I see. One is Cordova still has a tier 1 grant available, or might be the last one. And the state will match 50-50 up to $5 million. So, and you only get it once. So if you take less than $5 million, then, you know, you're kind of selling yourself short. So the city could put up $5 million, get the $5 million match from the state, and replace some of our floats in the harbor that are in really tough shape now. That's one path. The other path is to look at like a $5 million bond that you could match state money, match private investments, take that to the federal government, pursue the Tiger, WARDA, and infrastructure package opportunities, and try to get a you know, an actual expansion project going, and which might mean that you're going to have to limp your existing infrastructure along and maybe put more into your maintenance budget for a few years. And so that's kind of, but I don't know that, you know, we have the capacity to do both. So if you take that path, and if you didn't get any of the match for the upgrade, then maybe you could look at going back to the tier 1 grant to upgrade what you have. So that's just kind of a thought.
And the separation of enterprise fund from general fund, I don't know that that's really a problem, but it is a separation to some degree. So, you know, and as I've stated, none of our enterprise funds either are raising enough money to replace any of their capital and facilities. So this problem is system-wide, not just the general fund.
Well, I mean, the harbor is putting money away for repairs and replacement, but it's just not enough. I mean, they do have a savings account that could be used for matching. And I guess, yeah, while we're on the subject of the harbor, one thing that was one of my ideas I had when we discussed the expansion plan that Clay has referenced a few times is the fact that G float, no matter what, can't be repaired. It's beyond gone. It's the oldest floating stock we have in our harbor basin. And the thing with that Tier 1 grant is it can only be used on harbors that were once owned by the state and then given to the municipalities. So we couldn't use that $5 million for an expansion. It would have to go back into replacing our existing floating stock. So what my idea would be is, try to at least get G float replaced at the same time we went after the expansion, because then we could use that as, it's part of the same deal. It's part of our matching funds. Maybe we put up a $5 million bond and we put up $5 million from the state, and then we get $4.5 million floating fuel dock coming in from shoreside private investment. Then we're also creating uplands that we can sell, to help fund this whole thing. But you're still going to be reliant on a windfall from federal or other funding sources to get the expansion off the ground. One cool thing about an expansion would be it does increase revenue for the harbor, which could, there could be some sort of, I'm not sure what the mechanism would be, but currently there's a payment 12% or 14% the harbor pays for administrative allocation cost. Well, if we build this new harbor and the harbor has 300 more floats and they have a seawall for tenders to tie up and they're gaining all this extra revenue, well, they could help by paying off some of the bond the city has to incur. Of course, an enterprise fund can't go out and bond, only a municipality can do that, but they will be having increased revenues from the expansion that could, there could be something figured out at a later, like, I don't have all the answers, of course, but it could help pay for itself. It's not going to pay for itself entirely, but it could help offset some of the bond costs that the city would incur. Also, just, increased fish taxes and stuff if you get another processor out there. It's all, and property tax.
Bond payment's 10% of what you borrow.
Yeah.
500,000 for 5 million.
Yeah.
Because we're paying 2 million on 20 million now amount.
Yeah.
So, we did the motor vehicle fuel tax and the cap change to add 331 to get us to even. So if we added 500,000 to our debt, that's the revenue dilemma. And while that might be made up in the long term after repairs and stuff, there's still sort of a short-term window that we'd have to deal with. So.
One of the elements that Alan had mentioned in the strategic plan too was rate studies. And I've heard anecdotally that the harbor's rates are low in comparison, but that's one of the things the rate study does, is it looks at your capacity for raising and lowering rates, but also goes out and looks at other rate structures to see how you.
So we were pretty low about 3 years ago. I think that, I don't know when the study you're referencing was completed, but just in the last 3 years, we raised 21%, and we just raised another 10% or something like that this past winter. So now we're actually a little bit above Valdez, but we're still under Whittier.
Okay, good.
Yes, I'll say my little notes that I had. One thing that I think is very important, especially if we're talking about tourism, is our ferry and business in general. Having that fast ferry come in leave every day at 7 and come in every day at 4 made a huge difference. It was a scheduled every day. The ferry that we have now, you have to work out your route, and I would rather just not take it. And I think most people would rather just fly down to Washington and make a trip rather than just going up to Anchorage and getting some things. It's easier to get to Seattle than it is to get to Anchorage right now, I feel like, with the ferry situation. And when we did have that fast ferry, I think a lot of people around Alaska came to Cordova just for the weekend rather than going outside state to find another little community to spend the weekend. And that was all possible with our ferry and businesses. We all kind of know it, but I think that's a really major thing that needs to be on our radar, kind of top on the list. I think that ferry really hurts us. Then I have a few ideas about the chamber move if we ever want to like dig in deeper to each of those things. Also the fire and police hall, I don't know if that's on the list anywhere. It might be more down the line, but I think we need to start thinking about that, thinking about land, where it could go, the building, just in general, a long-term plan. And then land in general, especially because that last meeting was my first one. Be kind of nice if maybe we could do land sales at a certain time, not just when they come in. I think the community gets kind of frustrated with land coming up and they don't know, even though it's been advertised and it's on the list. But it would be kind of nice if maybe we did it quarterly so people like knew when to check, or just took a longer process for city. I have no idea how we can make that work or what some ideas are, but land.
That's why I was suggesting master planning,
Yeah.
all of this area. I think those decisions would be eliminated from the equation, and we'd have an established process in zones that would be long-term for us. And in other words, I think if we went through that and said, we can get rid of all of this, and then that would be made available, and that would be the end of it for the life of our master planning process. And I think that would make it easier for us. I think we could do one of those, you know, in concert with the comp plan to make it all work.
So we heard this morning in the directly from the highway system, one Alaska class vessel's going into service in June this year, one's going in the following summer, and their plan is to take the fair weather out of service and be done with the fast ferries. So if Prince William Sound wants to make a play for the fast ferry, now's the time to do it. So
I like the fast ferry. I know a lot of people say the slow ferry is more reliable, but I'd rather it not go and be every day. You can get to Whittier in a couple hours and just drive up to Anchorage personally, but I don't know.
And another thing is if it's here and the crew's here, it's completely different cost model to have them have a flex day on one end or the other and flex one of the days they work so they can do a makeup day. And a lot of those runs, remember, not because of the ferry, it's because of the way the dock's configured in Whittier. And we're up on 645 council, and there might be a little space in the pending agenda, but I'm guessing Alan was hoping for more feedback from council, and we didn't give you.
Well, no, this is actually a good start for us. It's a good, you know, good primer for us on what we already did. And again, I always say that we need to have another session. I don't know when that'll be, but, you know, what we're gearing up for is the start of our budget process, probably June 1st. So as long as we can get your decisions or your ideas hashed out by then, we're good. So we'll get Susan and schedule another strategic planning session, and perhaps in this format before a council meeting. I think that works pretty good. And then you only have to do one night, but we'll get it out. As I understand it right now, we're still kind of headed on the same path, but we'd like to put more emphasis on perhaps thinking about the shorter term funding for the harbor improvements and what that would look like. Steve's.
Yeah, we have a 6:45 public hearing. So adjourn the work session on strategic planning. Ready, Lynn?
Yep.
Okay, I'll call the April 4th, 2018 public hearing to order at 6:47. Roll call, please.
Clay Copeland,
Here.
James Burton,
Here.
Kenneth Jones,
Here.
Jeff Guard is absent, Melina Meyer,
Here.
Ann Schaefer,
Here.
David Allison,
Here.
James Weiss.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, tonight's public hearing is regarding ordinance 1168 on page 12 of the packet. It's an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Cordova, Alaska, authorizing the sale and conveyance of Alaska State Land Survey 2001-5 according to plat number 2006-9 to the Prince William Sound Science and Technology Institute for $50,000. So this is a public hearing. If you'd like to testify, you can just approach the microphone and state your name and residence to testify for the record.
Good evening, Tom Carpenter, 501 Sunnyside Drive. I wasn't at the last meeting where this was talked about at council, but so it's possible that a few of the things that I may say have been discussed and deliberated. And so first of all, I'd like to say that my opinions in no way are reflective of the Prince William Sound Science Center. I think the Science Center has done many positive things for Cordova. My sentiments are directed specifically at the land disposal below fair market value, not necessarily the person that's the intended purchaser. So I guess the first thing I'd like to say is that waterfront property is extremely valuable and we have none left. This is about one of the last places that you could ever build anything of significant size. The last big piece that the city sold was to AML, and a lot of promises were made, and it's a giant piece of property that a processor or any other sort of big industry type based could put their building on waterfront property. And it's been shown to me and it's been proved to me over the years that we have benefited very little by that sale have ever taken place. There's been no improvements made. The city has no tax on connexes. So my point being is that we need to be very cautious about disposing of property. The big thing that I'm a little concerned about is and I come to these meetings a lot, and you guys were just debating strategic planning. You got harbor infrastructure that you need to pay for. You have a waste oil building. You know, there's all kinds of things that the city's constantly needing to improve upon. I'll tell you right now, I'd be glad to pay you twice as much as $50,000 for that piece of property. Do I want it? No. But would I pay that much? Yes. I mean, the ink is not even dry on a sale of a piece of property in Cordova that's about, let's say, a tenth the size of this, and it probably sold for 10 times what the city is getting ready to sell this piece of property for, and it's not even waterfront property. So my point being, I think you really need to consider, is this the best and the best use for this piece of property? And if it is, I would hope at the very least that if you do decide to sell this piece of property for $50,000, that there are some well orchestrated and some negotiated terms in regards to property tax and things like that will be inserted into the contract language. The Science Center's been very good over the time that it's been here. It pays sales tax and a lot of other things. But if they're going to put up a very nice and expensive piece of property in lieu of the upfront cost for this land, it would be extremely beneficial to the city that they know that they're going to be able to be assessed at the current value that the rest of Cordova and the rest of the community is assessed at. And maybe that's something that they'll agree to without any debate. But I think that these are some things that you need to consider, because $50,000 for this piece of property, quite frankly, has to be at bare minimum 80% under what the current, market is. And I think that if you went and had this piece assessed by a property assessor, that I'm guessing $250 minimum for this piece of property. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could we have someone from the planning department maybe talk about the property value and what that property can and can't be used for? Maybe answer some of those questions?
No.
Leif or Sam?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Through the manager, I think, to staff
Okay.
would be the appropriate way.
Oh, that's fine. Sam, come up. Tell us what you know about the restrictions.
Well, so there are deed restrictions on this property when it came from the state to the city. I don't remember what year that was, but when it was deeded over, it can only be used as a recreational, public, educational, research type use. You could not put a cannery on that. The state would come in and take that property back from the city. So no retail, private type of business could ever be put on that piece of property. Currently, the assessed value is around $68,000. We're looking at $50,000 as the sale price. Anybody else? Any other questions?
When was the last time that it was assessed?
17.
Assessed and appraised are two different things.
Yeah.
You're correct. Yeah, it's very different, two different
Appraised.
things.
Yep.
The deed restrictions are the big, there's no retail value or cannery or industrial value to that land.
Thank you. Public testimony.
Hi everyone, Katrina Hoffman, 301 South 2nd Street. I am the CEO of the Prince William Sound Science Center, and Melina picked up on something at the last council meeting, which is that this property has a unique zoning designation, and the zoning is called conservation. And in addition to the deed from the state through which this property was transferred to the city, that conservation zone also has some boundaries on what types of things planning and zoning would allow to be put on the property. And so they indicated when they unanimously recommended that council negotiate directly with the Science Center that they feel that the Research and Education Institute is one of the allowable development purposes. And so that conversation did happen at that planning and zoning meeting. It's reflected in some of the notes that you have. And I want to thank you for your previous support on it. I know that the assessed value that the city council is allowed to dispose of a property to a nonprofit entity for any value they so choose. And so you've been generous in this case, and the Science Center has a heavy lift to do to be able to raise the funds to build the facilities that we will construct on site. It'll be on the order of about $15 million. And there's a lot of different ways the community can show support for that. And this is one of them. It's not the only way over the next 2-3 years as we're raising funds that we're gonna need support. But thank you for your support and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Is there further public testimony? Okay, hearing none, I'll go ahead and adjourn the public hearing. Just give us a couple, 3 minutes before.